So once again, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Guy Garrett. I'm the Assistant Director and Instructor at the Center for Cybersecurity. Our presenter tonight is Ethan Thompson. He's a Cybersecurity Ambassador and an undergraduate cybersecurity student at the University of West Florida. We really appreciate you coming in to see us tonight. It's really important. What we're going to be talking about is we talk about taking control of your online browsing. And Ethan's going to talk about some of the things that you need to be aware of to stay secure in cyberspace. This, of course, is part of the center's overall community outreach effort. The cyber ambassadors are typically in front of our area's youth. They spend most of their time in front of the folks in the K through 12 schools, and either virtually or in person, trying to encourage them to investigate what cyber careers might mean to them. So this is a rare opportunity for us to branch out a little bit and serve our broader community, and we appreciate your time tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so Ethan can take over.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan, and I am one of the cyber ambassadors here at the University of West Florida's Center for Cybersecurity. Now, what I'm going to be going over is a little bit of some ways you can be more secure when browsing the web with your web browser. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. You should all be able to see my screen. And today what we've got three different browsers I'm going to talk about. Two different browsers that I believe are more common within the general public, and that is Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox. And we're also going to be going over a third, little bit different web browser called Brave, which is a web browser that's more dedicated to security, as opposed to some of the other web browsers that may be available. So first one I'm going to go over is we're going to go over Google Chrome. So what we have here for Google Chrome is we have a lot of different options here that we can go over. And I have a little lesson plan here we can go over. And one of the first things we can do is we can talk about cookies. Now, a lot of you probably may be wondering, what is a cookie? What the heck is that? And what a cookie is whenever you enter in information to a website, what that cookie is it's a bit of data that allows the website to save something for whatever reason. For example, it might be remember me logged in, or if you have a certain answer to something and it wants to save that information for future use, that's something you can do. So you have a few options. You can allow all cookies, which means that if a website needs to save a certain amount of data, then it can save that data. Or you can block them from third-party apps, or you can do it in incognito mode on Google Chrome, and that's an option you can do, or you can block it whether you're in incognito mode or not, or you can just block all cookies, which might not be a good idea. It won't let you be signed in on any website, and there's some other features that might not be optimized for that. So depending on your needs, you might want to configure how you want those cookies to be set, and you can add different websites to use these certain conditions where you can say, okay, say I only want, what's a good website example, your Gmail or your Hotmail, your whatever, any kind of email. You want to save, you want to allow that website to use your cookies. So you can add this here, and let's say www.yahoo.com. And what that'll do is whenever I go to Yahoo, that'll allow that website to collect cookies on me, but no other website unless I specify it.
And what you're talking about there, Ethan, real quick, is you're talking about creating an approved list.
Yes, a whitelist of approved websites.
Yeah, we call them approved and blocked lists now. They've changed the terminology, and this is important because, for example, some people where they work, some of the websites they get involved with through the cloud apps or whatever might need some of these cookies to make the websites function. So in security, if you say, well, we want to block everything, you lose availability, even though you're trying to improve your security. So Ethan, as you've been a student in our program, what's it like trying to keep that balance between being secure and being able to use things? How would you describe that?
Well, one of the problems with cookies is you have a balance of, okay, how do we make the application or website, how do we make that more functional, but with as little information as possible? And that's a bit of a compromise, in order to make the user experience more beneficial, more positive. It needs to collect more data and save more data on you to make your experience more desirable. So say it might be recommending different things depending on your history. So like if you're on an online store and you're searching up different things, it might be beneficial for it to collect cookies on you, to collect data on you, so that way it can recommend maybe other products to you. Or if it was in your email, it could collect data for saving your login information so you didn't have to log in every time you went to a new page or something like that.
So cookies aren't all bad.
No, but they can be used for malicious purposes, such as they could be collecting your information and that information could get leaked and you can have issues. For example, if you're using this for your bank account, then they saved your bank account information, then they could potentially lose that information, and that could become a really big issue, really big security issue. Plus that balance, and you can't live in complete distrust, or else we couldn't make applications and websites as they are today.
Good advice.
All right, so unless there's any more questions about cookies, we'll move on to our next topic. All right, so this next one's it's a much simpler idea. It's called enabling safe browsing. And what we can do is we can go to security on our Chrome settings. And this allows you to modify different forms of safe browsing. So they describe it here. So you have enhanced protection, which will tell you about any kind of breaches with your password. And it can kind of give you some warnings if you're going to visit a website that's been previously reported to have any kind of malicious content. So if it's a website that could be trying to capture your passwords or offer any kind of software that could be collecting data on you without your knowledge, that kind of website, it'll warn you against that. And then you have standard protection, and that's a little bit stronger of a protection that will actively prevent you from going onto these websites, as opposed to enhanced protection, which will only warn you. But there's different circumstances and different reasons why you might want to do this. And you can also use no protection if you'd like, but that's highly ill-advised.
Now, just out of curiosity, why would anybody, do you think, choose no protection? I mean, this day and time.
Well, there's not many people, but most browsers want to give you this option if you would like to have that freedom. However, it's not recommended because someone who may not be as adept in exploring the internet and who may not be familiar in the cybersecurity world, then you might not want to use no protection because you might not be able to address cybersecurity threats as well.
So how would that work in cybersecurity research? That's another thing we do at the university. How would that no protection, how could we use something like that to help facilitate research?
Something like that could help any kind of cybersecurity specialist. It can allow them to encounter different kinds of malware and see any kind of, I guess, like unadulterated version of what that malware might be or that malicious website might be. You might be able to see the full effect and see without any kinds of standard protections or modifications.
Yeah, this is also something that's used in testing too. When you start looking at, you're testing a different website in a browser, the people who test such things will turn everything off to see what happens, and then they'll start, and true story, they'll actually turn on enhanced protection to see what gets blocked. So if I'm say marketing is a big part of what I do on my website, I'm trying to sell products, and the more things I can collect on your website, like Ethan was talking about, the better a job I'm going to be able to do of making sure I point you to the products and services you may be most interested in, especially if I'm upselling, which means I'm going to try to sell you more than you came for. In that particular case, being able to test this with enhanced protections, I see what people who want that level of privacy are blocking. So I might have to realize, I wonder how many customers are going to use that. Because what these things do, it's very much like your antivirus. It compares things to a list of known bad sites. And if you have the enhanced protection, it starts letting you know something bad is going to happen to you and trying to keep you from going there.
You're exactly right there. All right. And so the next thing we're going to go, or actually, before I move on, are there any questions from the audience about any kind of the standard protections or safe browsing options here?
Well, one thing's come up. Someone said, Alonzi Scott says, dark web access loves no protection options.
Yes. Dark web access, yes. So what that, so when you enter the dark web and you want to get into maybe some of the more pseudo legal, not a little more sketchier side of the internet. You don't want to
call it the world of felons and feds.
Yeah, it prevents you from having any kind of detection or prevention. It makes you a little more vulnerable and a little less of a threat in the dark web world. But yeah, so I don't think there's any more questions, so we'll move on to our next topic, which will actually be safe passwords. This is another really important thing here. So anytime you log in, at least for Chrome, and you enter in some credentials, username, password, what that'll do is it will allow you the option to save your password. Now, this might be great if it's just you using your computer and you would like to have the convenience of not having to log in to a site every time. You can just automatically log in each time. But say, for example, you're on a computer where you don't, you're not the exclusive user. Maybe you share it with a family member or a friend. It might not be a good idea to have that password saved, because then they could enter your account and they could do any number of things. So if you were to, example I keep bringing up, the bank information, if you have that password saved, then that allows that other user on your computer, they don't even have to enter a password or anything. They can just log in and they can do whatever they want. And that can be a really big issue.
Believe it or not, there are people who use public facilities like libraries, for example.
Yeah.
And I have seen where people go into a public library. In fact, the library on campus is open to the public, and people will go there. And what happens is they go there and they log into something, not realizing that that browser in that library someone may have set it to automatically save passwords. And then someone will come back later and harvest the passwords that they saved. Now, a lot of libraries now have put protections in place where they restrict certain administrative rights to certain types of software, but sometimes you don't have that option. So what Ethan's telling you is very, very important. It's one thing to maybe choose to save some passwords on your own local computer, the one you got in your home. But if it's a laptop, I mean, Ethan, what happens then if you've got a laptop and all these passwords are saved and somebody steals your laptop? What happens to
that means, it looks like he has his hand raised.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
I was told that it's not safe to keep your passwords saved on your browser.
I would not do that.
That if your computer were to be hacked, that's exactly what they target, to get your passwords. Is there any truth in that?
That's something to target. Yeah, that's something that could definitely target. But it could be something much more simpler. It could just be a friend or family member, and they might not be so responsible, and they could have your computer compromised. And then that could become a really big issue where then they could get access to your computer, and they could even use something as simple as something called remote desktop protocol, where they could directly interact with your computer. It'll be almost as if they're there physically right then and there. And they could just log in through that way.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If somebody is able to get access to your computer, they will try to harvest those files and get those passwords, unencrypted. And that's one of the things that you have to look for. If you're saving passwords in a browser, what type of encryption protocols, if any, are in place to keep those passwords secure? Even the password you use to access your own Windows machine, for example, can be stolen, even though it's an encrypted. And the Windows likes to use hashes a lot to do this, but there's a game we play called Pass the Hash, and it's not what you think. It's not a fun game. It's where you get this hash value and you put it back into the machine you got it from. The machine says, "Hey, you're my user, welcome," and all the permissions that user has, you have. And if you get one of those types of hashes from someone who has elevated privileges, like a network administrator, or someone like a cybersecurity professional, like the type of person that Ethan is training to become professionally, then you can do a lot of damage in a network. So that's definitely a good piece of advice that Ethan's giving you, not to store those passwords that way.
Yeah. And you can do various different things to mitigate this issue. One thing you can do is, if that's getting annoying, would you like to save your password? You can actually just disable that. So whenever you log into somewhere for the first time, it won't ask you if it wants you to save or not. And if you would like to remove a password that you saved previously, you can just click on that and you can say, okay, do I want to copy the password? Do I want to edit it? Or just want to remove it and I don't want to worry about it.
Are
password
managers any safer?
Some of them are more encrypted, but the most secure way, as always, is just remembering the passwords that you've created, because as of now, your brain can't be hacked. So that would be the best way to store passwords if you can. But if this next best priority would probably be some sort of encrypted password manager, or even better, some sort of two-factor authentication, where it could be like storing a password and say maybe using your phone as well. That could be really good advice for storing passwords.
Yeah, Carolyn Maddock was talking the same thing about recommending a password manager. Although we're not allowed to recommend specific products, we're a publicly funded university, so we don't get to do that. I can tell you that there are sources for that information. Password managers are considered a frontline defense tool. They're very commonly used by cybersecurity professionals, people who work in our business. It's not unusual for us to use different types of password managers, even for some of our work, because of the encryption involved in those password managers. These password managers use advanced encryption technology to really keep things safe, and it allows you to be able to log in using very long, weird passwords that you couldn't possibly remember. If you've ever entered a password online and you allow it to, like, for example, I know Norton does this, that it can throw up a password that's like 7X. It looks like a UPS tracking number if you've ever seen one of those, and you can save that as a password. There's no way you can remember that. Believe it or not, the current guidance from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that writes all the standards that we go by and the things we teach from, they actually say the best defense you've got is something that's very long. And one thing you can do is make up a password that combines some things that the combination of which is only known to you. So you might come up with something like 1900 because you like to study history, biscuits because you like to eat them, and Springer Spaniels. And that becomes a password. And you might change some of the characters to be a little crazy, but they're even going away from that from the NIST standards. And that would be your password. It'd be a very long thing, which would be very difficult for a brute force attack to guess. I wouldn't recommend using purely words you can find in a dictionary, but you can mix things up that way. And that's one way that you can have a very long password that, like Ethan said, it's easier for you to remember. And it's something that really nobody's going to think about addressing with you. Now, the caveat to that is when you're doing that, and Ethan, maybe you can address this because you younger folks are much more into social media than I am, but you've got to be careful that the things that you use for these types of passwords aren't things that are going to appear on your social media. I mean, Ethan, how do y'all address that?
Well, one of the big problems is whenever you use any kinds of passwords, or if you have a security question, a mistake that often a lot of young people make is they'll keep that information public, or they'll keep that on their social media profiles. So, for example, someone could be trying to get into your account through a security question, and it could say, "Oh, what's your dog's name?" And I forgot. On my Facebook, I posted a picture of my dog, and I included the name of my dog on there. So someone could just do a little bit of research, and they could find out, oh, my dog's name is Spike, and they could just enter that into your forgot my password security question. and bam, they can just change your password. They just hijack your account from you. So that's a really big mistake that a lot of people make with social media.
And here's a browser saving those passwords for you. It's just something that's so convenient, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
So what else can we do to be secure? I think we're still looking at the Chrome browser.
Yeah, I think we've got about one more. Yeah, we got to go to, yep. So one more thing, Tom, we actually got to go to somewhere else with this, but we're going to talk about extensions, because that's another really big thing that we go with. So there's loads of different extensions that you can get for your computer. But one of the most important ones I'm going to go over is ad blockers. So ad blockers, if you've ever gone into a website and you've noticed all these pop-ups and informations for websites and other products, most of those are probably going to be at least somewhat malicious. So it's good to have something like an ad blocker. And I'm not promoting specifically this ad blocker, this is just an example, but something like this will automatically block those pop-ups and those ads to try to freak your screen and make it less likely for you to become victim to a cyber attack. So what we have here is AdBlock Plus, and what this does, and that does exactly what I told you. But one thing you want to look into, if you ever look into any kind of extension such as AdBlocker, is you want to look at the privacy policy. Now, what this privacy policy does is it says, we might collect some information from you. It'll explain what, if any, and it'll say how it uses it, who is that information going to be sent to, and other things like that. It'll tell you, it tells you to automatically collect your IP address, stored separately, web addresses access, browser identifier, the referring page, and all sorts of different information, such as this. So anytime you want to add on one of these applications, you want to look at this privacy policy, because it willingly tells you what kinds of data out on you. And if it breaks any part of this privacy policy, well, that's a big problem for the extension as a whole, and that is grounds to sue. So are there any questions about ad blockers or extensions as a whole? And yeah, Elizabeth, I did want to address that in chat about using the same password for multiple accounts. That's a really bad idea for this reason. So if you had, for example, a website or any kind of application that stores account information, say one of them were to get leaked and use the same password for that as, say, your bank. So let's say Hilton Hotels, or no, Marriott, because they had a really big break. Say you used your account information for Marriott and that information was leaked about usernames and passwords. Well, guess what? Now everyone knows your password, not just the Marriott, but if you use that password for your bank account, then they have your information for your bank account. They can just log in based off of another break that happened with Marriott. If that makes sense.
That's one of the things password managers help you do. A password manager can create those individual, very complex passwords. Now, the downside is if something happens to that software, or if the software itself gets hacked. So there's always a plus and a minus in this business. Always a plus and a minus.
If password managers, if you lose track of it, you might lose access to all of those accounts as well, if you don't remember those passwords.
Well, I think we've got that pretty well covered. What's next on the agenda?
Well, that's about it for Google Chrome. So now we get to move on to our second popular browser. We get to use Firefox. So Firefox has a lot of the same functions and benefits as Chrome, just in a little bit of a different way. You can get the options here, you get privacy, and you can look here. We have some very similar safe browsing options where it'll tell you, okay, what does it do? What does it prevent against? And this kind of information. It'll give you any kind of information for cookies, so you can manage exceptions and you can add on certain websites that are allowed to collect cookies, and you can manage your data in a certain way. You can do all sorts of different things with that. And passwords is another thing you can do. You can have autofill. You can do all sorts of, you can manage which applications allow to use your things. Yes, Pat went, we are recommending two-step verification or any kind of two-factor verification, two-factor login, two-factor authentication, any kind of thing like that, because it makes it that much harder for someone to break in. If say one of those areas were compromised, for example, if they realized, oh, this is this person's password, it makes it that much harder for them to log in.
Real quick, just in case someone in our audience isn't familiar with multi-factor authentication, can you give us a brief overview of what they talk about when we say two-step or multi-factor?
Two-step. So what two-step is, or multi-factor is, it allows you to verify using two different ways. So for example, say Amazon, you log in. So once you enter in that password, that's one factor. But it's good to have a second factor, like Amazon might ask you, oh, what's this number on your phone that'll show up? And that's a second factor of authentication, because not only does a hacker need to have access or knowledge of your password, they also need to be able to access your phone and see what number that is.
Yeah, so what happens is it's something you know, which is your password,
yes,
and then something you have.
So that's a token, something like an access card. It can be your phone, anything you have physically with you. And there's other things like something you are, so something like a fingerprint scanner or a retina scanner for your eyes. Anything like that would be another factor. And
one of my banks actually uses voice print.
That's the most common.
Believe it or not, one of my banks, Ethan, uses voice print. You have a voice print record.
There's so many different ways. There's even ways where it, whenever you enter in a password, it can track your finger motions and it can see, oh, well, that pattern isn't really consistent with how this person usually types. You have other kinds of ways of authentication like that. But traditionally, you want to use multiple forms. So you don't want to use two factors that are both something you know. Maybe you want to have maybe a password as well as maybe a fingerprint scanner. It's two different things.
So if I was using, say, security questions like where did you go to high school, or what's your favorite ice cream? Yeah. That probably would be good.
Two
that
things you know.
So it would be multi-factor then. It probably wouldn't be a good idea then, would it be?
No.
There we are.
Not one. Biometric, yes, it does. There are some flaws. There are some catches to it. For example, with fingerprint, there's a way to catch your fingerprint, and with token, for example, like a key, there's different ways to fake a key, but the biometric is usually pretty good. I would agree.
Well, I think we got those questions answered. So keep walking us through Firefox, because it looks like they've got a lot more options than we saw previously. Looks like this browser's got a few more things we can do.
Yeah, they do. So there are a few more things we can talk about. For example, they give you specific options for how Firefox allows how Firefox collects your data. You didn't have this option in Chrome. So you can allow Firefox to make personalized extension recommendations. So you can just flat out remove that, and it won't recommend any extensions to you based off of your data. Or allow Firefox to install and run studies. Maybe you don't want them to collect that data for that reason. Or maybe you don't know what those Firefox studies are. They'll tell you exactly what they are. Or technical interaction data. Well, what's that? It'll tell you exactly what that is. Or you can have for security here, block dangerous content or block dangerous downloads or any number of things like that. You can have it so only secure website protocols are used. Call them hypertext transfer protocol secure. Make sure only websites that use that are allowed to be run. You have a bunch of different options here for your security. And you can see like there's some things that are here on here that might not be on Chrome. So as a web user, it's up to you to kind of balance, for accessibility and security, what kinds of options are important for you. You have to kind of figure that out and decide what's best for how you want to browse the internet and what are your priorities. But I think I've covered most of what I really wanted to go over with Firefox, unless there's any other questions about Firefox.
Well, there's something you mentioned earlier, and here we have something here where we talk about strict, stronger protection, but may cause some content to break. These choices, I mean, people like us would probably do some custom work at times because, you know, we do that for our businesses or people we work for. But for the average person, do you think that these options where it's, you know, to go strict, do you think that's a good idea to try it and see what breaks, or how frustrating do you think that might be for somebody that really isn't up to speed on what it really does?
Well, strict, I mean, for most general people, so long as they practice good web safety and web etiquette, they probably will be just fine with standard. But if you want to try to get rid of some of these options and you would not like some of these to be allowed, then you can do strict if that is something you would like to do. But to give you a little bit of freedom, Firefox also has the option to custom select what you would like to do. So for example, if you're not a really big fan of fingerprinters and you would like an option where you don't have fingerprinters for your protection, you can just disable those, and that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly something you can do. But I think that's mostly what I wanted to cover on here. But yeah. Are there any questions about Firefox?
Well, the chat hasn't been as specific about Firefox, but there's been this concern about cookies. And I don't think, Ethan, I don't think we want people to walk away with the idea that all cookies are bad.
No, cookies are good. They allow you to make these decisions, it allows these websites to better cater the website towards you to make it more convenient for you. So if, Owen, you have a question?
Yes, I don't mean to be rude about interrupting.
No, not at all.
Go ahead.
Okay, some friends of mine do work in the computer industry, and some of them say things like, oh, never use Firefox, it's not safe, or never use Chrome, or use Edge. And I'm not a computer person. I have no way to know which one is more safe than another. And that's part A of my question. Part B is, then you go on, you have to pick a search engine. And it's the same thing. They collect data, which one is safe, which one keeps your tracking history. So the line between Chrome and that sort of thing and search engines is sort of blurry in my mind, and I suspect in many other minds as well. So I don't know if those questions make any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me address, I think there's multiple parts to that answer. So you have a lot of people in the industry who recommend different browsers. Well, a lot of different people in the industry, they're going to have their own opinions about preference. It's like people saying, oh, what do you prefer, Microsoft Word or Google Docs? Or, do you prefer this certain mobile provider or anything? They have their own preferences, but I'm not telling you on this presentation here, you need to use Firefox or you need to use Chrome. I'm just showing you some of the features you can use in these, and given your own preferences, your own what you want these browsers to be able to do, I'm giving you the options to be able to say, oh, okay, I really like this feature of being able to allow Firefox to send technical interaction data. I like the ability to toggle that, or I like having these specific extensions for Chrome. I think they're really secure, or whatever the case may be. It's up to you to decide as a user which one best caters to your own usage.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Features are important, but I thought the thesis of this presentation was security. And
it is.
And so what I'm asking is, how do I, not being a programmer or a computer scientist, how do I figure out which browser is safe and which isn't?
Well, let me help you, Owen. I'm going to help you out on this a little bit. So let's take a look at Firefox data collection and use. Are these defaults secure? Well, this thing called privacy notice is the first thing I see. That's the first thing I'm going to read. We don't have to open it right now. Okay, well, we can.
I'm going to open it just for everyone else to follow along.
That's fine. So I would go through and read this. For example, I've been on several media presentations regarding TikTok, which is a popular social media app where people share videos. And TikTok tells you point blank, when you read through their privacy documentation, that they get permission to do a lot of things as far as what type of information they can get access to. Some of it has to do with functionality. For example, they want to be able to record what you do on the phone. Like if you start moving your fingers around or doing some things like that to control the surfaces on the phone to make the app do what it does. And that's a perfectly legitimate need to make an application work. The only problem is the way the language is written. It doesn't say they couldn't also just, happen to grab that little swipe you use to open your phone, which is another form of passwords. So you have to really read these things kind of carefully. And there are sites out there, I mentioned a few of them earlier in the chat, that you can go to and get some fairly unbiased advice. The one thing I tell people from a risk management standpoint, and this is true for businesses and individuals, is what's your level of risk? Can you go back real quick, Ethan? I want to talk about that, where this came from. So Firefox data collection and use, they give you the privacy policy, tell you how they're using the data. Why would they even want technical information sent back to them? Well, it helps them improve their product. So when Firefox crashes or something hangs up or something goes wrong, if you've got that box checked to allow that technical data to go back to Firefox, they're collecting that, and they've got AI behind the scenes putting it all together. And what they're doing with it when they put it all together is say, okay, our browser's having trouble with these kinds of websites. We need to get that fixed. So allowing that is not necessarily something that's insecure, but it could impact your privacy, because maybe you would rather not let Firefox have anything coming out of your system. So you would check the other choice instead, allow Firefox to make, you would uncheck that. For example, allow Firefox to make personalized extension recommendations. It's unchecked right now. You could leave it unchecked if you didn't want those extension recommendations, if you just wanted to go it on your own. So those little check boxes give you the ability as an individual to say, this is the level of privacy I want from this product. Let's say we look at another browser and it doesn't have that kind of feature. We don't know what it's collecting on us, and we can't turn it off no matter what we do. That is the kind of thing I'm looking for as a security professional when I'm looking for a browser to use, is do they give me the option as an individual user to opt out? And in this case, Firefox does this because, unlike some other companies, they're not as interested in marketing, for example, collecting data on people and sending ads to you. And that's another thing to think about too. What is the company that gives you this free browser? You're not paying for it. What's their price? Well, their price is your information. And what do they do with that information? Well, they sell it to advertisers, and that's how they make money. So it always kind of goes back to something that an old politician, a guy named Ross Perot, said many years ago: follow the money. So if you're wondering, is this browser safe or is it secure? Is it going to compromise my privacy? Ask yourself, if you're not paying for it, then they got to make money somehow. How do they make money, and how does that impact you? And that's one way you can kind of look at the security aspects and privacy aspects of the browser you choose. Does that help, Owen?
Yes, it does help. What's hidden in this information is you're in the industry and you have lots of information stored from your experience and your classes and your teaching. And that informs your judgment. What's different about me as a user, and I think I'm speaking for most elderly people who are users, we don't have that experience. So when you say, it's up to you to make a judgment on what risk level you're at, we don't have that database, so to speak, to make an informed judgment. So in many respects, we're just flipping a coin. And then when you say read the privacy notices, oh my God, they're 30, 40 pages long, and they're written in legalese. There's no way we understand what we're reading. So I'll meet you halfway. What you've given me is helpful, but we we're still hanging in the breeze to a large extent.
Well, one of the reasons we're doing this seminar, and this is a new thing for us to do in terms of from the ambassador standpoint, because we deal with a lot of young people in the schools and kind of get focused on the things they're concerned about, like TikTok and so forth. But that's one of the reasons we're doing this tonight, Owen, is to hopefully provide you with a little bit more information than you had, and also to hear what questions you might have, which can allow us to do future seminars. Certainly, we're not able to make specific recommendations because we are funded by the taxpayers, so they don't allow us to do things like that or be sponsored like a private organization would. But we're certainly trying to help you arm yourself. And you're right, the thing with legalese is a problem, but there are laws being put on the books, for example, most notably in California, where now privacy policies that apply to that state have to be written in plain language, very much like they do in Europe with the GDPR. So the regulators are now coming in and starting to listen to things like the people trying to read this privacy policy don't know it's going to compromise certain aspects of their lives. And so now the legal people are starting to come in and starting to require that too. So it's not a conclusive answer to what you're looking for, but I think we're taking a step in that direction. And certainly you can, ggarrett at uwf.edu. I'll put my email out there in the chat if you want to send me an email and ask me additional questions, or if you got additional questions, we certainly collect those, and that might be a future seminar. We're here to help.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, well, unless there's any other questions, I think we'll be able to move on to our next and final browser. I don't see anything else, so we're going to move on to that. All right, so we covered the two, in my opinion, two of the most popular browsers currently, but we're going to move on to something a bit more specialized that I feel most of you probably have not heard of, and it's a browser called Brave. Let me move it up here. So Brave is really cool in the sense that it's focused on security. So right when you get started, right here, it'll tell you exactly what things it allows you to do. So for example, social media, it can block certain things from social media. So maybe you don't want to see tweets anymore. Boom, they're gone. If you were to go to any kind of news website and they have a tweet on there, gone, doesn't show. Same thing with Facebook. Those posts, gone. And you have all sorts of these kinds of options here to try to block things and get rid of things that you find might be security threats. And there are a few more options as well for extensions. One thing I will talk about, but I'm not going to recommend, is there are options called, there are services called Tor and Web Torrent. So Tor, that allows you to mask your IP address and make it so you can browse the internet privately and securely. It makes it harder to for websites to see who you are and track you down. However, you might not want to use Tor because it can lead to you doing some malicious things. Not quite the most, it's not quite the most innocent thing to use. A lot of people like to use it to do a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing on the internet. And WebTorrent as well, which allows you to exchange files with a degree of masking. But what people do with this kind of technology is some of them like to use it for pirating movies and other kinds of software that you're supposed to pay for, but people are able to get for free. So that's why you generally might not want to use this, but there are options for you. You also have different kinds of search engine modifications here, where you can you have extensions here for you also have different kinds of cryptocurrency options if you would like to do exchanges like that. And even it gives you an option on this to perform a fully one-button security check. It'll do is it'll check, it'll make sure you're updated, your browser's updated, it'll make sure that your safe browsing is enabled, and it'll also see if your extensions you have on your computer it'll check and see if you have any of those extensions that have been reported to be harmful. You have all sorts of different settings as well, and that might be a little more technical. So, like again, we have these cookies again that we've talked about. You can enable your safe browsing. You can configure your passwords, and payment methods. That's a big thing. So if you have any kind of credit cards or debit cards saved, we can manage how those are used to save them or remove them if you do choose to save them. There's a bunch of different options for what you would like to do.
And Brave is one of those browsers. On their website, they have a very person-friendly set of articles and things you can read to talk about why their browser is designed the way it is and what the advantages are. And of course, with anybody who's got a company, there's always some marketing pieces to that, but they deliberately try to make it about as plain and simple as they can. And like I said, the nice thing about things like the Brave browser is that we're trying to let you know there are browsers out there by companies that their number one goal in life is not to collect your information and use you as a target for advertising. There are companies that are doing that. Ethan did point out Tor, and the onion router has been around for quite some time. The problem is it's typically associated with violating digital copyright, where people would share music or people would share movies or other protected works instead of paying for them, games. And the problem with that is a lot of the stuff that's out there, especially in the gaming world, that you're sharing often has malware attached that you don't even know about. So someone has come up and they've copied this particular video game and they put it out there in the Tor world, and people go, I don't have to pay $80 for that game. I can go get it for free. And they go out there, but they don't realize that they're downloading malware at the same time, because whoever produced that illegal game not only made it out there for free, but they've added a few things that give them, for example, they may be a bot herder. They may be trying to turn your computer into a zombie so they can use its computing power for crypto mining, for example. There's a lot of things like that happen. So Ethan's warning about Tor is very well heeded, and it's something that you have to be careful with, because there's a lot of that kind of activity going on. Now, something that got in the chat real quick, Ethan, we need to kind of address as we're coming up on time, is why aren't dangerous downloads automatically blocked?
One of the reasons, well, by default, one of the reasons people might not want this toggled is there could be a mistake with downloads, and it could falsely flag something that's perfectly harmless as being dangerous. So to prevent user error, that's automatically disabled, but it does allow you the option to enable that if you would like to secure your system. If that's something you'd like to do. And that's also another option you can do when you enable your when you have your site your security. When you want your safe browsing, it can you can configure that how you want.
So why is it so important to clear your browsing history? I see that pop up in a lot of these browsers. You can click, and when you close the browser out, all your browsing history goes. Why is that important?
Well, maybe you wouldn't like people who have used the computer previously to see what kinds of websites you've been up to. So the history is basically a complete database of what kinds of websites you accessed at what specific time and what specific order, which, depending on who you are and what you've been accessing, you may or may not want that to clear.
Another thing that happens, true story, folks, if you have a computer in your house that is used by more than one person, especially if there are kids or teens in the house, there are times where the parents will have their Amazon or some other shopping site logged in, and they'll save that so they can just go in and open it back up, and they attach a credit card to it. And purchases have been made by people who shouldn't be making purchases, especially young children or teens, using that, and they get access to the parent's credit card because it's already logged into the site. It's a permanent thing. So that's another thing that you may think about. Sometimes it's not being afraid of having a hacker kind of break in your system, or maybe somebody prying into your life. Sometimes it's just a practical type of thing where you want to make sure that if you've got an account that has a credit card or a debit card attached, that someone doesn't have the ability to log in and make purchases, even though they live in your own home. And those kinds of things have happened. And I know that there have been times where someone, for example, left access to their grades, and somebody was able to look at their student records and things. So those are those are things to be worried about with history. Not only just if you're out there looking at nefarious things, there are people that are in that world too, but a lot of it has to do with more practical implementations. So Ethan, what else can you tell folks about web browsers and trying to stay safe?
Well, as you can see, we showed you 3 web browsers here, and obviously this is not the full extent of web browsers, but this does give you an idea of what are some things you might be able to look for when you select a web browser. What are some options you can enable? What are some things that if it doesn't have this, it might be a tipping point for you, and it might be a deciding point whether or not you want to use that browser. And it kind of gives you a little bit more, maybe not so much information on which browsers are good or not, but how do I find a browser that supports the needs that I need it for security reasons. And that's the real aim I wanted to get out of this.
Well, we are coming up to about the last 5 or 6 minutes of our time. If anyone has questions, wants to raise their hand, unmute, whatever, that'd be perfectly fine. We're very glad to be here doing this. Once again, this is a community service, part of the outreach activities from the Center for Cybersecurity at the University of West Florida. We are not only involved in trying to create more cyber professionals to be out there to protect us, people like Ethan, who are training in our degree programs, but we also are working with folks who are veterans or coming out of law enforcement or maybe first responder careers. We even work with folks like that to try to help them move into from what they were doing to a cyber career as well. So we do a lot of work with a lot of different kinds of people who want to get the education and training necessary to join us. But we also want to be out here to tell our community what they can do to improve their own cybersecurity and become more aware of what it is like to be a responsible digital citizen. Owen has brought up a question. Should I use a VPN? So while Ethan's looking into that, VPNs are certainly a way that you can secure yourself. Someone's brought this issue up. What a VPN does is a VPN uses the public infrastructure of the internet. In other words, I don't own my connection to the internet. I rent it from some company. And my VPN allows me to create the tunnels I use to go from place to place and keep everything encrypted, where if somebody is monitoring, we call this an on-path attack, where somebody's sitting in the middle of it and trying to sniff my traffic, where if they're trying to sniff out my traffic, they aren't able to read it. They can sniff it out if they want to, if they're logged onto that network, but they can't read it. And this is something that's very, very important for travelers. If you travel and you go to a hotel or you go to a coffee shop or someplace that has free Wi-Fi and say you're going to log into your email or something, absolutely 100% I recommend VPNs for that purpose. That way, people who are sitting in the coffee shop logging into that same free Wi-Fi, if they're running different tools to try to monitor that traffic and see what they can find out, they're not going to get anything they can use. So that's very important.
How would you? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Go ahead, Thomas.
How would you go about getting a VPN?
You pay for them.
Oh, so you can just buy it pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, you can go out on the internet. There are different companies that include VPN services. There are some browsers that have a built-in VPN as part of what they do. A number of companies, Nord has a VPN product, Norton has a VPN product. I'm sure McAfee does as well. So Trend Micro, there's a lot of these companies that also do antivirus, anti-malware protection. A lot of them also have a VPN service that you can purchase. And I recommend, researching and making sure the companies are legit folks. Don't just, oh, there's VPN of the week and grab it. But it's always better to pay for something than you know what you're getting, and you can make sure that it's going to be there to protect you.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks, Ethan.
Sure.
We had a few questions in chat about VPNs. Marnie asks, if I'm running a VPN, then why is Google still tracking my location accurately?
That's an interesting thing. There's a couple of things that can be, and Ethan was showing you are you using the Chrome browser, for example? If you're using their software, then you're actually creating a tunnel between you and them. So there may be some ways that because you're allowing their traffic to come back to you, you're giving them permission to come back through your VPN tunnel, then there can be some back and forth in that regard, because you're giving permission. What a VPN is there to protect you from is not someone you're deliberately going to. Like if Bob wants to talk to set up a connection to Alice, Alice and Bob are having this conversation. Well, they're having a conversation. They're allowed to be part of that encrypted tunnel. But if John is out there somewhere trying to see what Alice and Bob are talking about, John won't be able to monitor that traffic, in a third-party remote kind of way and get it. So what VPNs are there to do is keep your traffic from being sniffed, not necessarily prevent someone you're actually, using to get to one place or another on the internet to track that information. If you allow them in the tunnel, if I log on to, www.mybank.com, then even if I'm using a VPN, they're going to be able to see some of the information I'm sending because I've actually, logged in and said, hey, I want to talk to you.
Doesn't it also hide your computer identification?
Can.
Well, at the end of the day, there's something called a MAC address. It's a physical address on your computer. It's burned into your NIC card, the network interface card. The thing when you plug that wire into the back, or if you're using a wireless transmitter, it also has this feature, and that is a unique fingerprint for your device. If that is ferreted out, then we can certainly say that device was responsible for the traffic. And there are certain ways to keep that out of everyone's purview, but the way the internet works for the people, like, for example, the folks in law enforcement who are working in digital forensics, there are processes they use to begin to look at transactions at that level. And that's how they typically begin to identify a specific machine that may be related in some kind of incident that they're investigating. And that can be spoofed, by the way. There are ways to spoof that where you use a MAC address that you claim is yours, but it's not. So those are the kinds of things that you get into some deep technical conversations on how to do that. But that a lot of times with VPNs, what you're really doing is you're encrypting what you're sending. In other words, I'm sending information back and forth to websites I want to log into, and I'm not allowing people to read that, because in transmission, when it leaves my machine and goes to wherever it's going, to whatever server, it's encrypted on the way. And because that tunnel is protected, it's almost like having a shield over the tunnel. If you think about it this way, if you've ever driven up north in some of the northern states, there are times you go under these tunnels and you're actually going underwater or going under a landmass. And when you go into this tunnel, there's no windows or anything. You're just in the tunnel. So your car disappears when you go in the tunnel and you hope it comes out the other side. But while you're in there, if somebody saw your car go in, they wouldn't be able to see, you from point to point. They're not going to see you again until you come out on the other side. And that's kind of one way to think about how a VPN works.
And we also have one more question that I think we'd like to address. It says, what is the safest way to remote, and I'm assuming that's remote access to your workstation from home. And one of the best ways would be to use something like Secure Shell, if you know what that is. And that's just a secure way of accessing files and your devices across the internet.
May I ask one more?
Sure, Owen.
Yes.
I'm really eager to learn. You could see that.
Not a problem.
Yeah, and you've been very helpful. I got in about 4 or 5 minutes late. I was having trouble with my connection, but have you touched on Edge yet? Because I've been using Edge.
No, we haven't touched on Edge yet because statistically, there's not really a whole lot of people that use Edge a whole bunch. And we really want to touch on some of the browsers that most people use to cover the widest range of audience as possible.
Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't know that. I thought Edge, being a Microsoft product, was probably the dominant thing used, but no. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Okay.
No, I think it's something like 70–80% of people who, and at least in the US, I'm sure, use Chrome.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Edge is one of those that, oddly enough, is the default for Microsoft users, but Microsoft users default to something else.
Yeah.
And of course, Google Chrome has quite a bit of the market for whatever, whether you like them or not, they've got it. And that's, again, going back to how the browsers function. One of the reasons, for example, cookies came about was to improve browser performance. There was a time, and I can remember when the internet, you had to hear this real weird sound that you heard before your internet connected. We used that thing called a modem back when the dial-up days. And, websites were pretty slow when they first started getting graphics and things. Things didn't work really quickly. Well, these cookies are part of the process of solving that problem of making these websites, as you come back to them and visit them again and again, work a little better, work faster and perform. Now with computer processing power and things that we have now, as that's increased, that's not as important as it used to be, at least not for most people with a new machine, a machine that's like 3 years old or less. So, some of the reasons these things existed at the time, it were done purely to make the experience better for the user. Nobody thought until folks like Google came along that, hey, this information could be used to, tell people this person, likes Cocker Spaniels. And if you're selling, stuff to people who are fans of Cocker Spaniels, we can point your business right to them. Wouldn't that be worth money to you? So Google and Facebook, some others kind of monetized that process and took a process that was designed to really make things work a little better, turn into something that made people a whole lot of money.
All right. Well, Guy, I think we've just about run up on time here.
It looks like we have. Is there any other questions that we can help you out with? One thing did pop up about ownership in terms of who owns things. And I'm going to say it this way. No matter who the owner of a product or service that you want to use might be, it's very important to think about who that organization is and what they might want to do with your data, whether they're a private company, a government agency, whoever it might be. You do well to say, if you don't really trust that organization and they have a product, then, good news is there are other products out there you can use. So I tell people, if you've got concerns about, well, this product's owned by these people and I really don't trust them, well, that's okay. That's a pretty good indicator that you might want to point your business somewhere else and choose another competing product. And when it comes to browsers, there's plenty of them out there. There's new ones coming out all the time. And we even discuss things like Opera, Safari, which of course is the default for Apple. And Apple does a lot of things to try to maintain a high level of security. They're very security conscious. So there's a lot of things in that world too, for the folks that choose to use the Apple series of products. Do we have any other questions or comments from the folks here at the audience?
Hey, Guy, this is Alonzi Scott. Hey, I just want to say,
hello, sir.
I'm glad to hear you and Ethan do such a good job with your cyber workshop. I've always wanted to sit in on one of the university's web shops events, and I think you guys did a wonderful job tonight. So thanks for providing all the insight and perspective. If you're not familiar with me, I'm on the board of trustees for the University of West Florida. I'm also a senior executive for the Office of Naval Research.
Well, thank you, sir. We're glad you took time out of your busy schedule to join us tonight and to take a look at some of the innovative work we're doing here at the Center for Cybersecurity. So thank you so much for those kind comments. We're definitely glad that we can get the opportunity to do this for our community.
Awesome. Have a good evening, folks.